So thank you for coming out tonight. This is a really great response. We're going to get started. We're going to get started here in just a second. I'm just going to kind of give you an introduction. I'm going to introduce you to our guest speaker for the night. Some people asked me, how did we choose these guest speakers? And it was really, well, I'll tell you about the process. So this has been a journey. This started out a long time ago. Actually, it started out a few months ago. We had a city council meeting, and we had some folks that came in, city planners, and they asked us, so we know that you want to give instructions to the developers. I don't know if anybody's noticed there's a little bit of development going on. There's some people that are buying up some property. So we wanted to give them good instructions, but when they were asking us, so what do you want? Do you want special street signs, or do you want special sized streets? I'm like, I don't know. I really don't. And none of council did. We are not experts in that. We would make the wrong decisions if we made decisions because we don't know how all of this stuff works. And so I set out to find out how all of this stuff works, and not on my own, but to find people that could actually do that. You don't want me doing that for you. You don't want me doing engineering either. That would be bad. So we met with a bunch of different folks. We found some people that had a real passion for Castroville, both people that are local and people that are not so local. And so we've compiled a group of people that we really feel can help guide us through this process. And I realized that this cannot be something that is solely driven by City Council. We have to make the decisions, but our decisions should be a reflection of your will and the will of as many people as we can in the community. So we did invite, I don't know if you've noticed, not everybody is a citizen of Castroville, but you are a community member of Castroville. So it doesn't matter if you live here, it doesn't matter if you live in the area, it doesn't really matter if you just love the city and want to be a part of smart growth. So we wanted to invite everybody out so that this is a community-led thing and not a council-driven thing. So thank you again for coming out. A couple of housekeeping items. If you didn't notice, there is an elevator out here. Thank you for the LSS for hosting this. Thank you for the Castroville Conservation Society for putting in so much time and effort getting everything set up. The man, Arnie, who just never stops going, has been working really, really hard for us. So we've had a lot of people that have really leaned into this. So this is not costing the taxpayers any money. What comes out of this is going to cost us money because we're going to have to go into planning efforts. So the biggest thing about this is an education process. This is a journey that we should take together. These are decisions that we should make together. And I wanted to make sure that everybody was a part of that journey. We've got the work after this to actually go and implement this and carry out your will and make sure that we do this smartly. So normally I prepare for these things really well. I memorize speeches, I get all my material together. We have been so busy, you're gonna get, it may not be pretty, but it's gonna be raw and it'll be true. So you get me kind of raw and true. So if you see me rambling a little bit, this is why. We are streaming this live. Thank you for Stephanie from Go Medina streaming this live. We will be recording this. We will have the videos on our website so that we can go back and refer to it. And so if we've missed anybody, I think we may not have missed too many people because most of you are here. But if we missed anybody, then they can go back and take a look at it and be a part of this as well. So did I miss anything? Restrooms, if you haven't seen them, if you go down the stairs to your right, off to the corner are the women's. Go around by the elevator are the men's restrooms. I think you saw that there are refreshments over here, and we underestimated our crowd, and we just definitely did not bring enough wine. I apologize for that. We should have known. I did want to mention this. We partnered with the Castroville Conservation Society because their mission is in part to protect the heritage of Castroville. And this, to me, is part of the heritage. It is the way that we live, the way that we interact. And so please give a big hand to the members of the Castroville Conservation Society, everything they put into this. If you get a chance, if this is something that you're passionate about, they've got a table set up here. Please feel free to go and provide donations for them. It helps them keep the wheels on the bus. Even better, join the Castroville Conservation Society, become a member of this, and be a part of this very active group in preserving the heritage. All right, so you might notice this farm just north of Castroville. This is part of what we have to enjoy. We have a beautiful town, and 200 years ago, Henry Castro and our founding families spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that we have what we have today. They master planned Castroville, and this is what it's grown into. It's the thing that we enjoy on a daily basis, coming together. This is the plan that they put. The plan has to expand out to the sides and up and down a little bit. So this is what we are trying to do as master plan. We're trying to do honor to the people that gave us this resource that we're now responsible for. So I wanted to put up here the reason that we do this. You don't realize all of the little nuances, the little things that went into the design. We find how brilliant these city designers were because of what has come out of this, and that is us. This is a community. And Steve is going to go into some of those elements, what we're trying to preserve more than anything, more than really anything, is the way of life. Somebody told me once that Castrovilles were resistant to change. And, you know, that's actually served us well in a lot of areas because we like the way that we live. You have all taught me how to be the right kind of person. I've been voluntold to do more things than I care to list, but it's because you all lock arms. How many people have gone out to St. Louis Day to volunteer for decades? How many people get out there? You'll see a lot of familiar faces. These are, a lot of these are newer. Most of this is, aside from the old pictures, are from the last 10 years. So I apologize, I've missed some of the older ones, but this is a really good example of how much, oh, there's our good friend, Chris Schuhart. That's some cold stuff. So this is why, I just wanted to remind us all, this is why we're here. It's because we love San Antonio, right? We're here because we love Castroville. And so if we love Castroville so much, there's nothing wrong with San Antonio. I lived in San Antonio for most of my life. I just don't want to be in San Antonio, and I don't want San Antonio to be in me. So if you look at this, this is Castroville about a year ago. This is 20 years ago. 1 year ago, see all of this? This is what's happened in the last 20 years. And those squares, and that's what it looked like 20 years ago, those squares are roughly the same size. And this is what you see in there. So these are nice homes. They're nice neighborhoods. My daughter lived in one of these. But this is called suburban sprawl. This is putting all of the houses, all of the cul-de-sacs, all of the people back behind the curtains. And what happens is then they have to come out. There's a guy on a horse down there. It's kind of funny. They all come out onto the feeder roads. They come out onto, this is Petrenko. This is what you've seen. If anybody drove Petrenko 20 years ago, and the pictures that you're seeing on here, thank you to Clinton Habe for doing the drone footage for us. These are from about 3 weeks ago. So this is before school came in. And you'll see as the traffic starts getting more and more in the mornings, this isn't near what it is during the actual school. And this is what's happened because they've tucked all the houses back behind there. So what we're going to learn about is how to, the traffic is one portion of it. The people, the community, that's a whole different portion of it. So those are the things that we're going to go through. I'll just let you bake in that. Well, I think that they have to sit through it. I was actually going to speed this up to make it look more frantic, but I'm like, no, I'm going to make you sit and feel the pain and feel the agony. It's painful, isn't it? And Highway 90 is starting to get like this. So the time to act is now. The time to plan for this is now. If we don't, we're going to lose what has been left to us. So the idea here is to change as little as possible, to grow as Castroville, not as San Antonio, not as California. We want to grow as Castroville. So we've got to figure out, how do we do that? How do we maintain that community? How do we lessen the impact on us? So with that, we have our guest speaker, Steve. I'm not going to say it right. I never do. Uber. I'm really close, but not quite there. So Steve comes to us from Louisiana. He's very experienced, but I'm going to let you I'll let him tell you about him, because he does that a lot better. Thanks, Steve.
You know, I had an opening presentation for you tonight. I got here yesterday afternoon, and I had been here previous, so I had an understanding of what Castroville was about, or generally. And I got here last night and started walking around, and then this morning at around 7:30, I'm staying at Josh Kemp's bed and breakfast, and we drank scotch until 3 o'clock this morning, and so this is not going to last very long, I assure you. No, so this morning I got up to do my morning run, and I actually walked the neighborhood and try and get a feel for the streets and the buildings and the architecture, and I was blown away again by the friendliness of the people. I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm accustomed to that. I come from that same kind of culture. And so I got to the town square, and lo and behold, the children were going into Mass. And so I followed them and went and said a rosary and attended Mass. And I realized, sitting in this church, that, you know, first off, I'm not a city planner, I am a village planner. I do small communities across the entirety of the Gulf Coast. And I generally build them from the ground up. It's very easy to do that. I don't have to answer to anybody but my developer and the city planners. But I realized this morning, and so the communities I build really have no soul. It takes time for a soul to evolve. And as I was sitting in your church this morning, I realized that my job, or your job, to continue building your community is done. You've got a soul here that is unbelievably strong. So now all you have to do is match the community to the soul that already exists. Now, I talked to a lot of people in the last day and a half, and everybody to a person said, we want to keep Castroville, Castroville. That can be done. When I look out here and I see the historic Castroville, the reason why you are who you are is because you know everyone, you engage daily, you're able to walk this community. There are a mix of uses that you can frequent. That's who you are. And so I'll talk specifically about my fear about who you are and how you retain that kind of sense of community that I see and I love here. Just by way of background, you know, I titled this presentation, Fine-Tuning of the Settlement. When I met with Darren months ago, he said, do not come in here and start talking about all this planning jargon and talking about this, that, and the other. He said, you need to be sensitive to the community. I said, I understand that. You don't know me yet, so quit being that way. And so I actually stole this term from a project that I was lucky enough to have been involved with in England called Poundbury. Prince Charles owns some property south of Dorchester, and he built a new town from the ground up called Poundbury. The first phase of the project had been completed, and we were invited, several planners from the US were invited to attend to study the expansion of the neighborhood. And it was very sensitive because Dorchester is a beautiful old town in England, and here we are coming in with a replica, if you will. And now we're wanting to expand it. And so we had to be very sensitive to it. Not only were we expanding the residential, we were introducing an industry into the community, which was very passé. The industry happened to be a chocolate factory, so that the residents could work inside of the neighborhood. And we decided to call it the fine-tuning of the settlement, which is very English, right? To say, very politely, that we're coming in here and we're going to turn your world upside down. And so the original title of this presentation was Suburban Sprawl Takes Over the Little Alsace Town of Texas. So you can see how your mayor was very effective in getting me to the finish line. And so I guess in June, I was asked to come. No, I wasn't asked to come in June. I was in Houston for a Lyle Lovett concert. And I'd never been to Castroville, so I decided, my wife and I were there. I said, let's take a ride to Castroville. So we drove here, and I had not studied it. I have a policy of not studying a place before I come in to do a project, because I want to know what it feels like when I drive in. And so we came in off of Highway 9. It took us about an hour and a half to get through the San Antonio debacle that's happening over there. And then we get into the closeness of Castroville, and we drive in and we cross the bridge, and I'm on this horrible arterial. And I told my wife, this must be some kind of joke. They can't be serious. And I was told that they have a wonderful downtown, so we pulled into, Josh had told me about your meat market. By the way, I'll tell you more about that later, but we pulled into your meat market, Jukes. And all of the products that you have there are what we have. Are very similar. Very French, sausage and cured meats and all these kinds of things. So I understand that. So we loaded up on all sorts of things, and I asked the attendant, the cashier, can you tell me where your downtown is? She was young, and she didn't really know what to say. And I said, I understand that you have a church on a square. Oh, yeah, it's over there. And so I'm like, okay. So we get out and we get in the car, and I'm trying to cross Highway 90, and I can't get to the other side. So we turned around and we went behind the store, and I'm on this street, and it was one of these oh my God moments. This is it. I hope this isn't all, but this is it. And I intuitively understand what you have there. I've had a tremendous amount of study in historic architecture. So I'm driving down that road, turn left, I'm at the light, and I feel such relief that I'll be able to cross sooner or later. And that light takes forever to be able to get to the other side. And so we get to the other side, my wife and I park the car, and we're walking around, and we're talking to people, and we're looking at the architecture. The church was, we thought, closed because there was scaffolding all around it, so we didn't go in the church. But I was just blown away at what you have. This thing is essentially equivalent to any great historic urban core in any city in America. I've done a lot of work in the French Quarter in New Orleans. This is just as rich as that. And so, coupled with the friendliness of the people, I felt like I want to do this. But when I talked to Josh, I was a little hesitant because I'm actually retired. I've been on sabbatical for 6.5 years. I haven't spoken to an audience in 7 years. So I was a little bit kind of thinking, I'm not sure that I'm still up to this. And to complicate it even further, I've been doing a lot of drinking. My wife and I decided 7 years ago to buy a sailboat, and we've been sailing throughout the Gulf Coast, the Eastern Seaboard, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean. And so for 7 years, until COVID hit, we had no plans of coming back. Well, we couldn't go into any ports because they weren't letting people in. So we came home. And I was getting a little bored. So she tells me when I said, I might want to do this. And she said, please do this. Please do this. And so it was kind of the beginning of saying yes, but I was still a little bit hesitant because I wasn't sure about what my task might be. And so after giving some more thought, I called Josh and said, yeah, I'm in. I want to do this. And I had to start writing a presentation because I haven't done this in a long time. And when I first started to see your logo, I was watching Castroville, the little Alsace of Texas. Well, I was also excited because I'm Alsatian. My family moved from the region in 1753. We came through New York and ended up in New Orleans. and eventually settled what is referred to as the Côte des Allemands, which is the German coast. And it was 4 brothers, and 2 of them stayed there and were farmers. We were all farmers, sugarcane and rice. And 2 brothers migrated further west to what is referred to as the Acadian coastal prairie. And so I'm a Cajun. My mother is a Cajun. And my grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandmother, both expelled from the places they lived because of their Catholic beliefs. My mother's family, Dugas, was expelled from Nova Scotia because we refused to pledge allegiance to the British Crown, and the fact that they were not going to allow us to practice our Catholicism. So we ended up in Louisiana. And that's a big part of who I am. And so when I see this, this is us. And when I look at this, everybody says, I don't know where this house is here, right? Well, look at your logo. You know, logos are made out of two elements, either place making or place marking. Place making is a term, you have both. The little Alsace of Texas. Your place marking is the architecture. It's this place. So when I want to expand this community and I want to replace, or not replace, but I want to build and keep you Castroville, the architecture is a big part of it. I drove your suburban sprawl. I don't think they ever went to your downtown. They have not attempted to recreate what this place is all about, not only in form, but in spirit. So this building is we call it an Acadian raised cottage. It was built in 1850. And this, I understand, was built somewhere in the 1840s and 50s, so it's very similar. But look at the forms. This was built by people who were not trained as architects or engineers. It was from the heart. And they built what they considered to be beautiful because it was a reflection of them. This building has a porch just like that building has. The roof pitches were 12 on 12. I was talking to one of your docents earlier. The reason you had 12 on 12 was because you wanted to get the snow off the roof. We wanted to get the rain off the roof because we had wood shingles, and if you didn't get the rain off, they would rot. And look at the fireplaces. I mean, they're very subtle, internalized. The details on these shutters and the details on those shutters were exactly the same. The window proportions, which I'll talk about in a minute, are exactly the same. They reflect the scale of the human being. That's all they do. They're vertical. The window panes are vertical. There's a very significant understanding that we need to go into when we get into the furthering of this discussion. So I asked for a copy of your plan. This is what I do. I mean, I create this kind of stuff all over the Gulf Coast, and I get paid a lot of money to do this. Now, the truth of the matter is, I'll call him Henri Castro because that's how we would pronounce it at home. Henri Castro was not a planner. He was someone who had come from Europe and had lived the success of a plan like this. So when you say, I want to keep Castroville, you need to understand the impact that this plan has on your lives. So while your block structure, this is a classical grid pattern. It's a 300 by 300 foot grid, which when they did this, there were no automobiles. This was much more about horse and buggy. And incidentally, the towns that negotiated with you were probably 10 miles away because that was the distance you would travel in a horse and buggy. These streets were horse and buggy streets, but they were also very personable. People could walk and you have a town center, which is illegal to do. So all of your suburbs that you have right now, you cannot build a mix of uses in the town center as you have it here. So how are you going to perpetuate Castroville if you can't have the social structure of this kind of activity? So you have a cathedral here, you have a town square, you have retail, commercial, businesses, and all of your streets radiate to the river or from the river. And if you study this carefully, you start to see that there aren't one size lot or one size house. It was allowed then for someone to build a small house if that's all they needed. They could build a big one as well. And usually what happened is the further you got from the town center, the bigger the lots got. And then when you passed the river, there was farms. And that model assured that you would know everyone. It was very environmentally sustainable, and the architecture represented you, Castrovillans. And so that's what you need to do in order to perpetuate who you are. Now keep that in mind. The good news, I think, is that you are in Texas. I mean, Texas is an amazing state. I lived here for a while. I lived here in Houston in the 70s, early 70s. And I hated Houston because it had no culture at that time. It was pretty much a big suburban sprawl place. And no one was talking at that time about the downtown. Nobody was, they weren't even talking about sprawl. It was just happening. And I quickly decided, you know, this isn't me. I'm going to go home and back to Castroville, kinds of places. I want to say that Texas, while it has all these shining stars around it, there are some glitches, and I'll talk specifically about that. But I mean, this state has riches that no state has. It has an unbelievable natural environment, all sorts of it, swamps, mountains, hills, and everything in between. And it's generally pretty clean. And the built environment is unlike anything in this country. You have some of the best cities that have ever been built from an aesthetic perspective. And the growth, any developer would die to have the numbers that you have. There was growth in Williamson County of 328% 10 years ago. That's just unbelievable. And the average growth for this entire eastern corridor is a growth of 71%. It's great news if you like sprawl. And so what I'm trying to infuse into this conversation is that you will have options. You can make a decision to do it another way. You just need to understand that there is another way. So Austin, Texas, right? Austin has been touted as having the most picturesque capital of any state capital in the country. And it is actually beautiful. It has grown between the year 2000 and 2010, fastest growing city in America, bar none. The growth, however, has grown predominantly as separation of uses. And I'll use that term a lot and I'll explain more later, but it's called sprawl, which is what you're experiencing. 98% of all the growth in Austin is suburban sprawl. San Antonio, on the other hand, had a significant growth between 2010 and 2020. One of the fastest growing cities in America as well. At the same time it was growing, it also was documented as having the highest crime rate of any city in America. And the predominant methodology of growing was suburbia. We're doing work in San Antonio now, and I think it's a beautiful city, but it's headed in the wrong direction. And it's beginning to ooze, and you're going to be the recipient of some ooze. How will you receive it? Houston, Texas, my old home turf. You know, Houston is, by all stretch of the imagination, a wonderful city. It's got great arts. If you're wealthy, it's a good city to live. If you're middle class, you have to travel quite a bit to get to and from your home. In the recent years, there's been some kinks in the armament, if you will. There's been a lot of flooding. This is a comment maybe didn't work as well because Dallas flooded and it hasn't been traditionally flooding. It had a 300-year rain event, but Houston is not. Houston's getting 30-year rain events and totally flooding. That's a sign of growth that was not planned well. And don't let anybody tell you any differently. There are ways to prevent flooding from occurring. It takes planning. It's been estimated that by the time a person works in Houston 35 years and retires, they will have spent 3.5 years behind the wheel of their automobile. Now, that sounds pretty horrible, doesn't it? But there's more to it. The divorce rate in Houston exceeds 50%. You ever think about the effect of driving an hour and a half in the best part of the day to get to work, and an hour and a half in the best part of the day to get home? And where are your children all this time? What are they doing? They need parents. It's not a wonder we have many of the issues, and I would argue that all of the gun issues that are going on is in no small part due to the growth factor and the method of growth that cities are experiencing everywhere in this country. This is a little town in northeast Texas I had to drive through when I go hunting. It's named Uncertain, Texas. And I often wondered why it was called that, and I think they may be visionaries because they're not sure whether they want to grow or not. And so maybe we should give some thought to not growing. So let me forward a bit and talk about how I got into this whole movement. In 1990, I had a client contact me and ask if I would be willing to meet with her to discuss development of their property. I was doing suburban development at that time and absolutely interested. So I sat down with her, and I would drive up to her house, and she has a beautiful home on the bayou there, and we're sitting down, and she says, you know, Steve, and you could tell that she was somewhat disturbed about the conversation, but she said, you know, I don't know how to start this conversation. She said, I'm not positive about what I want to ask, but and I'm thinking this is maybe some kind of an affair that's about to happen. I don't really understand where she's going. And she said, I grew up in a very small town on the west bank of New Orleans called Algiers Point. I was lower middle class. Now, this woman is now worth $500 million. And she said, I have never been more happy than when I was a child growing up in this community. And I didn't appreciate the reasons why, but in the last several years, I've been trying to understand what it was about my life then and my life now. I should be the happiest person on earth. I've achieved some significant things. And her emotions were welling up inside of her. You could tell that this was a tough conversation to have. And so she said, I would like you to design a subdivision that replicates the small town that I grew up in. So I thought, wow, that's exciting stuff. I love that. I had no idea at that time how difficult that was going to be. And so I started going through the planning process, and I found out that there was a movement in the country that essentially, you might have heard of the term NADA, no additional development anywhere. People are concerned about growth. I mean, you're concerned about growth. Maybe not as much as you need to be, but you're concerned. And when we started meeting with the city, hundreds of people like this would show up opposing any concept of mixing uses like you have here, small lots, small houses, a no-brainer, a no-go, nada. And I was shocked because what we were proposing was the creation of a wonderful small town with all of the attributes of what you have here. I discovered that, after study, that there was a problem that had been kind of evolving and developing for, in reality, over 100 years. Rules had been written and have been continually written that slowly make what you have here unallowable to build. And the analogy is if you took a frog and you put it in a bucket of cold water, set it on top of the stove, turn the heat on. The frog would swim around in that water and eventually kind of get comfortable in the warm water. And as it gets hot, it becomes lethargic and it cannot jump out of the water. It dies. A similar analogy would be if you took that frog and you threw it in a bucket of boiling water, it would jump out immediately. The point being that your sprawl is growing very slowly. It's not something that's concerning you yet, but there will be a point when you will die, and it's going to be too late. So I'm putting you in a bucket of cold water right now. Let's plan to get out of it. So in 2001, we did several projects subsequent to the first one, 4 or 5, and all of them were as difficult. We had it varied depending on which city we were in, as much as 130 variances to 190 variances to get a town built to the zoning ordinances. And National Geographic came out with this article, and they said the problem with American growth, and they are the ones who labeled it suburban sprawl. And the problem is that they realized that the origin of the problem was that we were separating uses. We were no longer allowing houses to be next to stores or schools in neighborhoods, and et cetera, et cetera. And they said that's creating a monoculture. And I was a farmer growing up. If you plant sugarcane 4 years in a row, you can plant on the 5th year, the cane is not going to do very well. So we rotate crops, and if you plant all one type of tree, the American elm is a classic story. If you planted the American elm in the entirety of your community and a bug hits one bug hits all these trees, all your trees die. Nature has a variety. Great communities started off as human inhabited places that were a variety of things. So that's an important component. As a result of separation of uses, because of how they function, we are now designing thoroughfares, and Darren showed you the slides. If that doesn't concern you, it should. All of your traffic from a whole neighborhood comes out of one place. And guess what? That road has to get bigger and bigger, and as you grow, it will never be big enough if that planning model is perpetuated. It's not about a human experience. It's about the demand of affordable housing that really has no walkability. I mean, people don't walk in suburbia, and we'll talk about why. And then finally, the loss of the regional character. Most developments in this country today have nothing to do with the places they're being built in. They reflect a production builder's ability to build the same house 1,000,000 times. And they're going to transplant something here, generally, that does not necessarily represent you. And when they attempt to do it, it's usually a kind of an Alsatian house in drag. And so I mentioned to you that this problem started hundreds of years ago. This is actually England in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The planners in England realized then that people who lived near industrial uses were getting sick. The fumes were toxic, and they came up with, during the Industrial Revolution, concepts that would segregate industry from housing. It was the first attempt in the world to address these ills. And so in the US, turn of the century, 1900, we were going through some tough times. We had a Great Depression, a World War. Farmers were moving into the city. Remember we had the Dust Bowl, which is probably, you would know that. And so farmers were not viable, so they were moving into the cities, and this was their life. It was not very good. So urban living got a bad rap. And then we were thrust into a world war, a second one. And so when we left this, many of our soldiers were excited to get out of here and be doing what they were doing. So they left, and they fought this war. They used amazing machinery. We won the war. And the equipment that we used was primarily why we did it, and obviously the heart of the soldiers. And when we came back to the US, we were welcomed with open arms. You know, it's been touted ever since as the greatest generation in American history. And when they came back, the government decided, you know, we need to repay them. In 1922, there was an FDA loan, FHA loan system that would actually finance housing, but it was in the inner city. When the GIs came back, they didn't make funding available to soldiers and their families within the inner city because of what I just showed you. It was not a good place to be. They wanted to reward them, not punish them. So what they did was they built housing outside of the city centers. Now keep in mind that we had begun to discuss separation of uses. Actually, in 1922, there was a Supreme Court case in New York that challenged the ability to build industrial uses within the neighborhood realm. And it was called Euclid versus Ambler. They won. The industry was forced to move out. It was the first significant victory in this country relative to the separation of uses. And it was termed Euclidean zoning. Your code today is written using Euclidean zoning. It is the separation of uses that originally was just two uses, industry and everything else. And then it was industry from retail, housing from retail. And the premise was you secure values if you separate these uses. If you don't have a grocer that's right next door to a house, it's assumed that that house will have better value. So we get back to the US, fast forward, we're now turning those machines that won the war into the machine that is conquering our landscape. But now what's happening here and in every city in this country is we're building based on Euclidean zoning of the separation of uses: residential, green space, industrial, and commercial. You can't walk here from there. You can't bike here from there. And it's become so insidious that the residential yellow should be 10 different colors of yellow because it's no longer legal to build a $250,000 house within the realm of a $1 million house. It's a social segregation that's occurred, and to make sure the value of the $1 million house is retained, we've zoned those properties. Now I've studied your zoning, and you have done some things that are positive toward that regard. And then the advent of the automobile. So around 1948, when the soldiers came back, everybody had cars. It was kind of an interesting thing because prior to that, people got around by walking, by carts, by all sorts of means. And the advent of the automobile began to rule the entirety of the development practices that we had. Because we're separating uses, it was very easy to drive from the neighborhood to the town center. The advent of the mall. So your downtown started dying, the malls opened up, people loved the mall, it was air conditioned, you could drive to the mall. They didn't realize that everything else was dying as a result of that. And so the car was, a primary culprit in this overall picture. This is suburbia. This happens to be Phoenix, which is going through some interesting times now from an environmental perspective. But this is all suburbia. They're building 5,000 houses a month in Phoenix, or were. It's kind of fallen off. That's an amazing amount of growth. Now, so in Phoenix, you have a neighborhood here of housing types. You have a neighborhood here of housing types. You can see the rooftops are very different. And just for good measure, they put lakes between these houses so that the person who lives here damn well better not come to this neighborhood. I mean, they make sure that it's separated. And so this is zoning at its best. The result of that housing pattern is welcome to the future of Castroville. The major arterial, these are the 5 laners. People live here. In order to shop here, they may be right there. They've got to drive all the way around to come back around and get on this arterial to shop here. This parking lot, by the way, is designed under the Euclidean zoning laws to provide parking for about 4 weeks out of the year. The rest of the time, it's all empty. It's not necessary. And think about the place. I mean, would your Chamber of Commerce say, we want to take you down this arterial to show you how wonderful our city is? No, they're going to take you to downtown Castroville. Why? Because it's awesome. It's rich. It's all about who you are. So we separate schools too. Kids can't walk to school. And today, when I first started lecturing on this, kids could walk to school. It was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They can't now. But parents and kids can walk to school, but they can't when they're on the arterial that's 5 or 6 miles from their residence. And so schools used to be neighborhood schools. You have them here. Pretty amazing stuff. Suburbia, and I was amazed to see Darren's slide. This could be your new neighborhood. And so what is, so I want to make a point of something. This is not ugly. That's not what it's about. The developers spend an awful lot of money on the facades of these buildings. Now, usually they spend no money on the side. It's like having a hospital gown on where your butt's sticking out of the back. These houses are horrible in the backyards. The money is spent on the front. They can be as many as 5 different roof pitches. Well, look at your architecture. You're so simple. It's gable roofs or hip roofs. It doesn't cost that much money to build that beauty. Copy Castroville. There are driveways at every house. There are sidewalks that nobody ever walks on because there's no place to walk to, unless your car breaks or you're indigent or something. And in response to that model of growth, we're designing these unbelievable intersections. In Europe, this would be a roundabout. In the US, it's called a continuing flow intersection. They cost, this is old numbers, this is 2018, about $13 million to build. Now, what's really cool about it is it continues to flow. So it's counterflow. You have cars coming through here, and the cars who are going this way are over here. So these cars can come around. Now, under the federal government guidelines, you have to provide for pedestrian activity to get federal funds. So under the theoretical possibility that a pedestrian would someday cross this, they spend a lot of money providing crosswalks. Nobody ever walks. They can't cross them. They're ridiculous. When I first saw one, we have 3 of these in our community. When I first saw them, I was at a Chamber of Commerce banquet. We held this 3-day event. And I said, sometimes we're sold a bag of goods. Everybody, by the way, the traffic engineer showed this. Everybody started clapping because this intersection is horrible. It was horrible then. And everybody started clapping. So I had to speak next, and I got up and I said, I want to go back to that slide, this slide. The problem with the slide is that we're never given an opportunity to say, if I do this or I do this, which one would you rather? And I'll ask you, Chamber of Commerce, would you rather spend $13 million on this or $13 million on great education? Everybody was absolutely dumbfounded. Absolutely, the education. Give us an option. Say 13, a great school, or something that had quality of life benefit. Give us the options and plan so that you don't need these. That was the takeaway. We've talked about the monoculture. I'm going to skip that piece of it just so we can move on. But So this is not Castroville, but this is how we used to build towns. This was normal. You know, it's a mix of uses. You had civic buildings in the form of churches and city halls, public squares, which is part of your green space, and it's where people gather and have all these events. You know, the slides you show of your downtown are amazing. You had houses of different types, different sizes, relationships. It's still parked cars. And then there was the rural edge, which you have now. You still have it. You're losing it, but you have it. And you don't control that real estate. You don't own it. But you can create models that allow growth to occur more concentric to the town center and not eat up all your farmland until it's needed in 15 or 20 years, which at the rate you're going to grow, you will grow. By the way, when Castro developed this place, within a few years, there were only 350 people living here. And your growth has been about 100 people every 10 years. So your population, as I understand it today, is about 3,500 people. Just in the last 2 years, you've doubled the size of your community. Your development pattern has gone from 100 every 10 years to 750 people in 1 or 2 years. Times 2, that's 1,500. And all of a sudden, keep Castroville, what does it mean now? Does it mean what's being built out there, or does it mean this? How do you preserve that sense of place? You do it with this. Everybody knows this song, right? You don't know what you have until it's gone. So, you know, you have a beautiful, I went to your hotel out on the edge of town night before last and had a glass of wine out on the porch, and I was looking at how beautiful this place is. I mean, it's incredible. This is what it looks like. It used to be said that when you lost a field, you gained a village. There was something of equal value that was being exchanged. And this happens to be Alsace. This is your origin. A little different, but my God, look how beautiful this is. We paved paradise, and this is what we ended up with. And this is what you're going to end up with based on how you're growing now. So I need to refer to something here because this gets to be somewhat detailed. This is we're always asked about, you talked about things eroding over time. Can you put some light on it? So I did a timeline, and this is what it is. So in 1900, far left of this chart, we built Castrovilles. It was normal. There were no Euclidean zoning laws. We built community. And in 1920, there were 13 people in the country per car. Today, a half. How many cars can we drive? Every household has, on average, 3 cars. A lot of cars, a lot of traffic. We had World War II in 1940, 45, the GI Bill in 1946. In 1950, fast forward, growth is happening, 4 people per car. The first Walmart store was built in 1962. There are 80,000 Walmarts today. Every one, well, I used to be able to say every one. They're starting to, because they're not as successful in the suburbs, they're beginning to come back in to the neighborhood centers and have created a neighborhood model, which is kudos to them. But the point being that retail has moved out of the town centers to the suburbs, and in order to get there, you drive. Everybody drives, the roads get bigger, you gotta accommodate the traffic. And so you continue this model, you see where you're going. So you have 2 choices. You can grow the way you have grown historically, or you can grow the way the laws currently outline your growth patterns to occur. I'm going to digress a little bit so that I know that this is too much to handle. So this is, I love talking about what makes Castroville beautiful. There's so many human qualities that are down here that you don't really understand. For years, we tried to understand why, if you had a modern building and a traditional building, and you show it to people and you ask them to vote on which one they prefer, 90% of them will pick the historic building. It's because it's beautiful. It has to do with their scale. It has to do with the location of materials. I mean, these bricks were probably fired within 10 miles of here. It's the color of your earth. It has a relationship. So there was a book written, which I got in 1984, and I never read it because it was kind of boring at the time, and then I picked it up later. I was blown away by it. It's called The Old Way of Seeing by Jonathan Hale. And essentially what Hale said was that the human eye looks at nature as an extension of itself. They don't understand why, but it's an arithmetic equation. When you look at this nautilus shell, you would never think that there's order to this. It's a random act. You know, not all shells will be exactly the same, but generally if you cut a nautilus shell, this is what it looks like, and you'll know it's a nautilus shell. And so Hale starts looking at, you know, what is the nautilus shell? So here it is in its form. And if you begin to diagram it, what is beautiful about the shell is that it has a proportion that at the time was misunderstood, but is very much about, this is Leonardo da Vinci's, universal man. And da Vinci was probably one of the best at understanding the scale of human beings. And he realized that human beings were very comfortable with a perfect square because it's us. He also realized that human beings are very comfortable with vertical proportions. They don't like horizontal proportions because it means death. So vertical proportions, particularly those that are equivalent to the human figure, your hand, your face, your body, there's a comfort level with that vertical proportion. Look at these windows. They're vertical. The window panes are vertical. The historic buildings you have are better proportioned. This is a later building. So probably an architect that did this, screwed it up. And so when you look at the nautilus shell and you begin to dissect it, if you create a square out of this natural piece, perfect square, what's left is the same proportion that you started off with. And it's a unit of 1 to 1.618. It's called the golden mean, the golden section. The Greeks invented it. If you took that same section and cut it again, you have a perfect square, you have the golden section. It's intuitive. When you see it, it's beautiful. The American elm is considered the most beautiful tree that we have. It's a proportion, when they're perfect, 1 to 1.618. We use them as street trees because they create great corridors to drive through. Plastic surgeons are beginning to catch on to this, and they're actually bringing people in and want to have a nose job. Well, you need to fall within the golden section. So people we consider beautiful, if you take their face and you put it in the golden section, and you see where their eyes and their mouth fall, which would be 1/3 points, chances are they're very attractive. Now their details are important as well, so you have to start paying attention to those things as well, which you've done in your architecture. So you can begin to dissect the human face and understand that these third points are actually very well proportioned, the details are balanced, things work, and we think of these people as beautiful. In 2008, we did a charrette, a workshop, and I had a box of pictures of people, and I had people pick images, and we ended up collectively deciding that this was the person we were going to use, and they said, this person's attractive, what would you do? So we took it, brought it into the computer, and we began augmenting it, and everyone agreed that this person was more attractive. And all we did was put it within the golden section. Very little change. You still recognize it as the same person. So then, taking it one step further, we said, let's take somebody who really doesn't fall within the golden section at all. What can we do? Now remember, I went to the Lyle Lovett concert just before I came here, so I love this guy. He's awesome. He's not the most attractive guy, and Julia Roberts, I don't know, she's a beautiful person, evidently. And so we began to look at Lyle Lovett, and why is he not necessarily, the figure of beauty? And so we started working on it, and we spent days and days messing around with this, and we came up with the revision. Now, we changed the details, we changed the proportions. So I think you get the drift. Now, part of this study is to talk about what human beings perceive as being beautiful. So if we're going to build something, we should build beauty. And if our perception of beauty is a reflection of our own image, then we should look at the architecture that we do. This happens to be a window built by a slave in 1756 in Louisiana. This is an Acadian cottage. This is exactly 1 to 1.618. There were no plans for this, by the way. They had to build what they thought was beautiful. This window pane is exactly 1 to 1.618. And all of the Acadian structures, which are very similar to yours, parallel very closely those proportions. Expand that thought to a building. This is an Acadian raised cottage, very similar to some of the things you have here. This building is perfectly square. These columns, while they're not perfect 1 to 1.618, they're approaching that scale. And when you look at this building from the side, the 8-foot deep porch and the 12-foot height, perfect golden section. So let's carry that to the street. Now, you don't have perfect golden section here. That's a weakness. You can improve upon your downtown in ways that are very easy to do. But the golden section, 1 to 1.618, is a comfortable proportion for people to walk through. We want people to walk. By the way, I live in a traditional neighborhood that I built. On average, people weigh 7 pounds less than suburban people because we walk to the town center, to the gym, to the coffee shop, to the restaurants, and we have some great food. But we walk through this kind of closure. We plant street trees to create that golden section. We also plant street trees on both sides. This happens to be a park. On both sides of the street to create the golden section to drive through. When people drive through closure, like if you drive through a tunnel, don't you slow down? It's a psychological discomfort. You slow down because you're not sure of what's going on. So people slow down when they go through the golden section. And it's beautiful. More urban, golden section. Tree plantings, golden section. Driving through this, wonderful. Terminated vistas. So this guy's driving down this street. If he goes too fast, he's going to hit that building. He has got to go around it. So we pull buildings out into the middle of the street. And we terminate it with great architecture. So how do you achieve this? What are you going to do? So we had a meeting today, a several-hour meeting, trying to discuss where are we taking this for Castroville. There are a lot of options that you have. There's codes that are now written that will allow this to happen if you adopt them. One such code is called the form-based code. And form-based coding essentially is using the golden section to create form that people love. And in order to make it understandable, the development of a code was developed using what's called the transect. Transect is a geological term that it can mean a vertical section. You know, in the oil and gas industry, any of you are in that business. The transect of the geology of a strata is studied in order to determine the depth of the drill and what kind of layers you're going to go through. In geography, the transect is typically a horizontal understanding of how the land is built. So you have the oceans, you have the beach, you have the primary dune that nature set up. It built up over time. And then you have the trough, because when the water comes through, it creates this trough. So this is the transect of geography. So we decided, why don't we develop the the design of communities based upon the concept of a transect. And so taking this concept of section, here it is in plan. This is Castroville, by the way. So here's your transect. Now, one of the things I want you to be aware of, I can go to New York City and design a borough there using the same concept. But in New York, the T6, so this is T1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, real simple. The T6 is the densest of the housing and building types. T5 falls off a little bit. T4 is more kind of suburban, and on down the line. So when I come to Castroville, you have a transect, and your transect for your T6 is this. So when a developer comes here, you tell them, we want you to develop, and we would like you to use the transect, and our T6, by the way, is this. Now you might want to change it, and you could change it over many years. It can mature. So your density right now, I would guess it's about 4, maybe 5 units to the acre. I'd be pushing it. But that's what the scale is. So then when you have a developer coming into your town, you want to replicate your town, you need to talk about how those densities have worked for you. And so these are the transect zones. The transect that's rural is your farmland. It's not developed yet. It may be someday. So you need to be thinking about how it might develop, when it does, if it does. Your transect 2 is your farmhouses, density of maybe 1 unit to 4 acres, things of that nature. And you have some of that as well. Transect 3, 4 is your suburban development. Now this is not suburban, it's urban, but the houses are closer together. You have, right here you have 4 units to the acre, which is probably close to what you're doing in your suburban developments. Maybe not quite. And then the further from the town center you get, you're getting a more luxurious pattern. This happens to be an avenue that we designed. It has a 12-foot bufferway. These are live oak trees we planted to create that closure. This is brand new. I mean, I say brand new, 18 years old. The houses are set further back, but they're southern. So this neighborhood was coded architecturally to use Creole architecture. You didn't have an option. We defined it as the materials, the scale. First floors are 12 feet. You don't have an option. You can go 14, that's your option. Second floor, minimum of 10. Pitches, 8, 10, 12, and 12. No option. So that's how we created a kind of a perpetuation of the place. In the urban setting, this is the town center. So this is 5-6 for this neighborhood. This happens to be North Shore, New Orleans. On-street parking slows traffic down, minimizes the big parking lot. You notice there's no big parking lots. Actually, this is a parking lot. It's treed. You can't see it. But parking's behind the building. And so people can walk here, and it's phenomenal. Some of the highest priced real estate in a new village that has been built. This happens to be in Covington, Louisiana. The French Quarter. Talked a little bit about that. This place, so I was involved in rebuilding Mississippi and Louisiana after Katrina. What was interesting, several things, but this did not get destroyed. It was perfect because it was environmental. It was built on the high ground. The rest of New Orleans wasn't. So that's some beginning discussions. What even is more interesting than that, people drive or fly into New Orleans to the airport 17 miles to the west. They rent a car, they drive through 17 miles of suburbia to come to something, bless you, something that is illegal to build. You can't build this anymore in New Orleans. So we're coming back in after Katrina, trying to build resilient communities, and we couldn't do this anymore. It was absolutely illegal to build. And we had to beg the question, and they began to talk about, well, what would you do differently? Well, nothing. We'll do this. And so what is this? This is a 1-acre town square. It's public green space. There's a cathedral here, 2 museums, retail ground floor on both sides of the Pontable buildings, office use on the 2nd floor, and residential on the 3rd and 4th floors. All mixed use, illegal in New Orleans, not in the zoning law. The streets, this street right here is 20 feet wide. It moves about 10,000 cars in a given day, very, very slowly. I hate driving down that street, but it's fabulous. The sidewalks are 12 feet wide. There are no trees in this particular area, but there's covered balconies because you had to be protected. So this is the transect of a major city, and it's historic. You know, this is 1812. This is a new community that we just finished. This is our town square. The buildings in the background. This is 1 acre. I copied the French Quarter here. These buildings are 3 stories high, retail and residential above. Actually, this is a hotel, but this is townhouses above. Town Hall is located on the end here. There's a health club there, 2 restaurants, spa, and on this side there's 4 restaurants, coffee shops, and this happens to be the neighborhood I live in, and it's 3.5 minutes from my house. And it is flying off the shelf. Values have exceeded everything in the city. It's unaffordable. That's the negative, okay? The negative here is that we've created such a collector's item that most people can't afford to live here. When I did the project, I sold it to the council by telling them that what's wrong with having our school teachers, our firefighters, our policemen live in the same community as oil and gas guys? What's wrong with that? They said, nothing, why don't we do it? I said, because you can't, your zoning won't let you do it. It can't happen. So we need to think about it. And so it worked for about 2 years. Actually, the first townhouse we sold, which townhouses had not been built in our community for about 15 years. They were considered low-end housing. So we built townhouses. We sold the first townhouse to a retired school teacher, widowed retired school teacher. And then it began to sell, and they would flip it, and the next thing you know, it's $400 a square foot. Nowhere else in the community is it, but in this place, because of what they're buying into, that's the value system. Open space. Within 3 minutes of every house in any of our projects is a park of some substance. Values increase every 100 feet by 10% the closer you are to a park. So if you're 100 feet, you can get up to a 30% increase if the park is good and you have an engagement. Now notice these parks aren't in the backyards. All these houses front these parks. This is an 18-foot wide street, which you don't allow here right now. It's one way this way, one way that way, parking on the street. Parking on the street slows traffic. But that's the kind of values you create, open space. Your open space today is created by setting your house back 20 feet and 2 5-foot setbacks on each side. So I ask you, what value is that to you as open space? The 2 side yards are air conditioning compressors, garbage containers, very little else. The front yard, the 20 feet, if you do anything with it, it's minimal because half of it is the parking lot for your car, 2-car garage. Usually half of the facade of the building has nothing to do with history. Detention. We reviewed a plan that was submitted to you recently. It's not built yet. And you know, I applaud the engineers who worked on it. It's suburban. It's very suburban. And the rules they're following are your rules. They've done a great job being creative with the limitations you've assigned to them. But the detention is in the back of the houses. And so in many neighborhoods, now I was told that in order to mitigate that negativity, they were going to code wrought iron on the back so that they could see the pond. And that's a good solution, actually, if there's walkways and all. But generally what happens is detention that's relegated to the back of the lot or the back of the block has no value. Nobody walks there. Houses that back it have cedar fences and there's no engagement. It collects trash and it's a good place for people to hang out. When you put the pond on the front, this pond has houses facing it. All of these houses, these are $3 million houses that front these ponds. They don't have to be $3 million, it could be anything, but it just happens to be. So in our community, the highest priced real estate was bayou property, river property. This project has about 2 miles of river frontage. the highest priced real estate in here is our detention that we created to create post-development run. This is an environmental concern. The reason why you're doing detention now is to avoid the flooding that Houston is experiencing. And the kind of the rule of thumb is you have to retain 100% of pre-development runoff. So before this place was developed, how much water was absorbed into the ground post-development. So when you fill it with concrete, streets, houses, you have to retain 100%, so you build these things. You can put them in the back. It used to be the lawyers wouldn't let you have access to them, and there was weeds and rats and everything else. Louisiana alligators and snakes. And so we argued in this particular project. We said, why not let this become an asset? This is a linear park, runs through this entire project, and retains 120% of post-development runoff, more than by law we're required. That was kind of a mistake. I miscalculated it and came out to 120%, but it's a great asset. And so we need to think about green spaces as a community asset. So we've talked a little bit about the scale of things, and architecture is a very important part of planning. Every conversation I have with communities across my work area, the Gulf Coast, people think of planning as two-dimensional. When I walk through your downtown, I'm thinking three-dimensional. I'm thinking about the height of your buildings, the relationship of the house to the street. Are there porches? Do I get to walk down the street to church on Sunday and meet someone? Those are all three-dimensional components that you have to think about. So we broke architecture down as a component of planning. So you have, first off, a two-dimensional plan. We have streets, which is the second element. We have architecture, which is a third element. And so we tried to put this in focus. We have a national, a universal language. Everybody knows classical architecture, and we all think of it as being beautiful. You know, when this was built, it was somewhat challenging, but the truth is this building belonged in this place. This stone built that building. And part of that beauty is the fact that they were just able to bring it here. And now these are parts of human scale. This happens to be the Crete, and the scale is not the golden section, but you can begin to understand the details and the beauty of this. This guy wants in. And then there's the national language. In the U.S., I mean, this is Boston. This is their city hall downtown. So when we started building these kinds of buildings in the late 1700s, early 1800s, this brick was made somewhere near this place. This brick color is the color of their earth. There was a logic to buildings at the time that were relegated to human scale. So there's a base, the abdomen, and the head. And so that's why it's comfortable. Historically, as you grew and you calibrated as you grow, the density changed, but you have a cap, you have a body, and you have a base. It's different scaled. You have vertical windows, you have all of the elements of the humanness. And then around 1980, we gave all that up. This is a building. It's not Photoshop inserted. This is the reality of downtown Boston. So that architecture, which, by the way, is totally out of vogue now. People hate it. They didn't like it much when they built it. But it had nothing to do with this. You're replicating that on a different scale. You're building buildings that are this. It's not that. So think about it. Welcome to the golden section, pedestrian, Alsace. Look at this. Look at the rural edge. Look at the materials. It's stunning. It's beautiful. Why can't we do this? This is you. It's unbelievable. These kinds of buildings are not expensive to build. Your developers who are coming in here do not need to create this false facade. This is what you're getting. So, there's an attempt here to address your local vernacular. There's stone, and there's brick, and there's garages, and there is a front door here. So how much thought, and look at the number of roof pitches they have on this thing. And if you look at this side, they put some brick, but when you get past this point, it's hardy plank. And the back is not even hardy siding. They transition to hardy plywood or 4x8 sheets with battens nailed on to make it look like board and batten, because that's the cheapest. That doesn't hold long-term value. This does. And then, of course, this happens to be Bilbao, Spain, and that is real. That is for real. Anybody know about the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao? So this is built, this street that I'm driving down is phenomenal. I mean, it is the best quality architecture in the world. And a US architect comes in and builds this. Now, I could defend this as well. Civic architecture is one of the few components in a community that can exceed or precede or ignore the historicism. It's a piece of art. That's a museum. But that's what's happening. I could also have put a McDonald's down there and it had been just as insidious. McDonald's, you might love it. I go to it. But they don't build according to your community. They build according to what they know they built everywhere else. We work in some communities today that have become so restrictive that McDonald's has to come in. They're going to come. They're coming. Now, I said today, you have a great McDonald's on Highway 90 here. They did a good job with it. Probably one of the best McDonald's I've seen other than St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. But if McDonald's wanted to go down there with their golden arches, how would that feel? I can guarantee you that Bilbao, Spain would not allow McDonald's to build their golden arches right here. They would make it out, whatever this is, Spanish. Santa Monica, California. I mean, are we serious? This is built. These are office buildings in Santa Monica. So bring it back. Put this in perspective. This is a convenience store. It happens to be a Circle K. This is in my community. The retail value or resale value of properties on both sides of this are zero. This is all about convenience stores. There's 130,000 convenience stores in the country today. And this is what they all look like. It's all about the cars being able to pull in, do their business, and leave. Nobody can walk by here. There's no value for anything near it. If you mandate that, there's nothing wrong with the convenience store as a business, but if you mandate, yeah, we want you, but you're going to behave. This is your convenience stores. This is downtown Castroville. There is nothing in this that is expensive. It is beautiful, it's walkable, it is historical, and it's easy to build. Instead of building all of the stuff that I saw coming in on Highway 90, mandate that some of these people pay attention to who you are. And so, put it in perspective. We talked about suburbia. This is suburbia to the left. What does it look like? It's a series, it does have an arterial. Now, this happens to be a collector, this is the arterial. Cul-de-sac streets. And the reason why your code in Castroville requires streets to be 30 feet wide. A 30-foot wide street with no street trees and in the middle of the day, no parked cars. People will drive 35 to 40 miles an hour. That's not a good thing because nobody walks. And they drive that way because psychologically they feel good about it. There's no golden section. They can just run right through this thing. And in order to get to this park, they can't walk. They have to get in their car, come down the cul-de-sac street, hit the collector to the arterial to come to the park. Same thing is true for retail. Same thing is true for your schools. And every road trip adds requirement for greater width. So this collector ends up being wider as a result of that. You probably have 13-foot lanes instead of maybe 11, et cetera, et cetera. So your downtown is set up with a grid. You have a town square, you have commercial. Now this commercial, I did this on purpose to show you that commercial can front a major arterial like your Highway 90. and it can also front the neighborhood. And so I can walk from here to a store. I can walk to the park. I can walk to visit a neighbor. I don't have to, but I can. In suburbia, you can't. It's not an equal trade. This is what it looks like. Here's your suburban development, and this is what it builds out as. That's what you have. You're building this now. Garage and driveways. And now this one happens to separate the sidewalk from the street, which is a good thing, but there's no street trees. These houses are not rocket science. They're pretty builder stuff. And this becomes the interface. This is people's front porches now. You know, we sit on the tailgate of our pickup truck and say hi to people who walk by. The old world kind of places where you have the grid and you have houses closer to the street. By the way, the origin of the 20-foot setback, so you'll know, is so that the car can park in the front of the house and not stick out over the street or sidewalk. That's the reason for it. So if you begin thinking about what can we do differently, we have some solutions. But this is what you get when you have a walkable place. We create different street sections in our design code before the project is even built. This happens to be 1 page of 8 pages of street sections. Every street does a job. In your community, the project we reviewed, there's 2 street sections for the entirety of 380 acres. We may have had 26 boulevards, one-way boulevards, two-way boulevards, arterials. There's so many different things you can do. I'm not going to get into this level of detail, but we did today. There's a science to making places better for different age groups. This happens to be a concept where in a traditional neighborhood like you have, children, actually I saw them today, they walked from the school to church because your street's pretty narrow. You know, your radiuses are actually very, very small. And when you have tighter radiuses, your cross time is about 11 seconds. In suburbia, it's about 23 seconds. So young people and older people, myself included, have a more difficult time crossing in a lengthy period of time. Cross sections should be smaller so that people can walk. And I walk, again, I said I walk to the gym, I walk to the coffee shop, I meet people that I know that I didn't know before. I don't know if I told you the story, I've had a couple of discussions today, but I walk to the gym, and I've been doing that for years, and there's an old couple, they're in their 80s now, they were my age when I first met them. They sit on their front porch every morning. And so I'm walking to the gym, and I say hi, and I don't want to, it takes every piece of energy I have to go there. So I don't want to talk. So I go do the deal. I'm coming back, and inevitably they're still out there, and we have a conversation. And we've become very close friends. And about 2 years, well, no, it's been 6 years before I retired, I'm coming back from the gym, and I think, oh God, I got to walk past Miss Como's house. I'm going to go around the block. So, because it's all gridded, I walked around the block. Went home, took a shower, and I'm going to work. And my wife comes into the bathroom and she says, Miss Como wants to know if you're sick. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, you didn't walk by this morning, and she figured something was wrong. That's the kind of relationships that you have because her porch sits 7 feet behind the sidewalk. It's that kind of thing that is really, really rich. And so that's the conversation there. You know, the building, urban setting, these are streets that we design. This happens to be a 26-foot wide street. This is a lane. So many of our developments have lanes or alleys on the rear with garages. This is what they look like. They're actually pretty phenomenal places. Utilities are placed back here. This is a rural road. So you're talking about transect. I'm going to back up a second. So this is a T4 or 5 street. Transect 4 or 5, urban kind of. So formalized on-street parking. Transect 3-4, no formalized parking, but people park on the street. This happens to be in the middle of the day. Nobody was home. Front porches, we put fences to create a private zone so people don't impose on them. And then high density transects. So everything relates back to that T system, the transect. Rural, T1, T2. So you have a beautiful countryside. This is what your roads should look like. anticipating future development so that you have enough right-of-way in the future to maybe correspond to that. 5-minute walk zone. I talked a little bit about that a minute ago. People in the South will walk 5 minutes before they drive. It's pretty interesting. It's a science. Because they know that it is quicker to walk that distance than to get in the car, back out of the driveway, drive down the street, go find a parking place, and go to where they're going. 5 minutes, 1,320 feet. If they have to walk 7.5 minutes, they will drive it 50% of the time. If they have to walk 10, they will never walk it, unless it's a health walk. So this is a neighborhood that I did. This is a 5-minute walk zone. This is the town center. I live here. So my walk to the town center, there's a gym here, is 3.5 minutes. The people who live over there never walk it. But we have another town center here because I needed to create a walk zone. Here's the zone. We have a town center on the river. And then we have another town center here. That's how you grow this community. So, you know, I'm talking about your downtown. By the way, your town center is a 7.5-minute walk to the outside. How did he know? He was brilliant. And then when you grow a big community, you look at a number of 5-minute walk zones and you connect them with bikeways, with wonderful streets. You preserve land that has to be preserved, wetlands or, you know, pristine forest, and that's how you create this kind of community-wide green space. This is Castroville. This is a 5-minute walk zone, 7.5. You have 3. You should have centers. You do. You have some school stuff here. Now, the truth be known, somebody did not like you. They came through here in the 60s and said, you know what, Castroville's horrible. We're going to slice the hell out of them, and we're going to put this insidious thing running right through this wonderful old town. It's known today as Highway 90. How did that happen? Why did it happen? So when we started to do some of this, we needed images, and this happens to be an employee of mine. This is one of our major arterials in our city, and we wanted to video, so there's a sidewalk here, it's 4 feet wide. We wanted to show how uncomfortable it was. So we were here for over 2 hours. We never found a pedestrian. So this is one of our employees that we made walk on this sidewalk. And then we suggested, okay, so this is all retail. And in order to come here, you had to drive 5 blocks to a red light, turn around, and come back to go to a restaurant across the street. That's how it's structured. That's how your suburban, that's how your Highway 90 is structured. This is how you ought to structure it. Parking lots are boring. People don't walk past parking lots. You can understand why. This is how you deal with that. You create on-street parking that's formalized, but you put parking behind the house. Want to watch it again? So this is applying the rules that I just gave you. So think about it: suburban, unwalkable, buildings that have no character of a place, no street trees, all about the car. Same section. You can do it. This didn't cost any money. The people who did this were paid for by this. Bikeways, crosswalks. You know, boulevards are beautiful. They're not just pretty. Boulevards were designed originally to create a respite when a road was wide. So people walk across here, they can stop here, and then they can make the next crossing. So that's a benefit of a boulevard. You can put street trees in it, which actually create the section that I was talking about. So you have a choice. What are you going to do? Good variety, and you can read this. Enhance the economic competitiveness. So San Antonio, you know, has done fairly well. I mean, it's considered a great city. But in order to accommodate the growth that's coming, they're pushing it this way. And you're going to get it, want it or not. Now, one of the things about a developer, they want to be where there's a market. There's a market. You're not trying to attract a market. There's a market. So why not create something that is a little more difficult for somebody to come in here and change your place by making them do things. You might not get everybody that way, but you're going to get the best. When you build more compressed, it reduces your cost for development, it reduces your cost for fire protection, police protection, schools. All of those things are less expensive in urbanism than it is in suburban sprawl because it's so much further apart. Busing kids, just that cost alone is a huge cost. So reduce your commuting time. I'm going to suggest that you begin actually thinking in Castroville today about light rail. It sounds a little bit stupid, but light rail has a future. And when you begin looking at your sections in your streets, boulevards should be wide enough to accommodate the future of rail so that people can get on rail here to go into San Antonio and vice versa, because they want to come to this great town that you have, which will become a tourist resort. Protect the environment. That's a sensitive subject, but you have to do it. It's becoming more important. So who are you attracting? There's some specific things going on in the country right now. Just with COVID, a lot of younger people are living in the neighborhood, but they're working in the neighborhood. For 50 years, families were driven by the conventional American family, husband, wife, 2 or 3 kids. That's no longer the case. Married couples and children make up less than a quarter of all households. Now, that might be different in Castroville. This statistic may be 50%. But the truth is, that's where it's going. So you want to attract the best. Young professionals, empty nesters. And so a young professional is a very different person than an empty nester. An empty nester, though, could want the same house. A smaller house, may want a bigger house. Single parents, a new norm. Couples without children, and senior citizens. So housing types: live, work, and walk. That's the formula. The national survey, 6 out of 10 prospective home buyers chose a well-designed mixed-use community. 60% of the market. When I talk about, kind of density, everybody goes on point and says, we don't want density, because this is the picture that you get. This is density. This is the neighborhood we did. It's somewhat Alsatian, if you will, but that's density. These are townhouses. So that's what I'm talking about, calibrated to Castroville. Castroville multifamily, Castroville density. The critical ingredient is mixed use. It's preserving the rural countryside. It's creating great places. Attract the teachers, the nurses, the firefighters, police officers, retail salesmen. These people don't make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're great people. Why not have neighborhoods that can accommodate them next to your doctors and lawyers who make all the money? And guess what? Your children. I'm amazed at how many people move back to Castroville. If you build well, you can accommodate your children right out of college who aren't making a lot of money, but they're the future. These are statistics I'm not even going to bore you with. Sprawl is very expensive. You're beginning to see that cost, and you will see it in the future. So what do we do? I'm amazed that you're all here. This is an amazing turnout. You all have a role. Everybody in this room has a role to seeing that Castroville grows responsibly. It's broken up into the citizens, the elected officials, and the business leaders. Darren, your job, should you choose to accept it, is change the regulatory climate. That's a critical piece. We talked about that today. And it's not that difficult. Update your zoning and land use regulations. We talked today about looking at we're not talking about looking at a neighborhood. Before you look at the neighborhood, you have to understand the regional growth patterns. And where are our future roads going to run? How is it impacting wetland, trees, farmland? You need to understand that before a developer comes to you and says, hey, here's my plan, I want this approved. Well, guess what? Too late. So you need to change those things. Change, more compact components, density, tax deferrals. These are all concepts that you can begin to impose. Change the dialogue so that the citizens understand, hopefully after this presentation, what it means to do it right. Change the climate of the politics. The role of you as business leaders. Attend planning meetings. This is the first one. This is actually going to be the most fun planning meeting you will ever attend. It will erode from this point forward, I assure you. Lobby for zoning law changes. That's your job. And force it upon your elected officials. Locate businesses. So I was here last night. None of this is open. The only place I could eat was the McDonald's or the fast food lineage that's running on the outside of your town. This ought to be where people are coming. I want to be down here. I couldn't even get a glass of wine. I told you I've been drinking a lot. Encourage your employees to be active. I'm going to run through this because it's getting late. U.S. population is expected to increase 33% by 2030. That's only 7 years, really. That's a lot of people. You have so much opportunity that you do not have to undersell yourselves. You demand the best because there's a lot of market out there. 94 million more people than there were in the year of 2000. I mean, that seems like yesterday to me. In Texas alone, you need 1.5 million units of multifamily. Now, multifamily typically means negative stuff. No, build it the Alsatian way. Build great multifamily. What we're finding is that people are now in their 60s, late 60s, 70s, and early 80s. They're selling their houses and taking their nest egg and letting it invest while they pay rent in apartments if they're well designed. So be thinking about multifamily as a viable option for housing types here. It's also a great place for young people to move back into. There's so much market left. You just need to be aware that you don't have to undersell yourself. Growth equals choices and opportunities. Remember this. Sprawl creates long commutes. Your 90 is going to get worse as it goes because people are going to be going back and forth. It creates bedroom towns with no sense of community. You're already getting it. It consumes natural areas, which you don't even realize today because you're not even talking about what's wet and what's not and what's trees and what's farmland. And it isn't Castroville. It's not what any of you said you wanted. So why are you letting it happen? So I was trying to figure out how I'm going to close this thing. And, I wanted to talk about 1844, what you did. You had a great plan. It was phenomenal. It was walkable. You had a mix of housing. You have parks all over the place by default somewhat. You had strong economy and balanced budget. So I told you I drove into your community and I was kind of shocked. I mean, honestly, you don't deserve that. That's that corridor. This is it running in plan through your neighborhood. Look, they didn't even attempt to coincide with the grid. What were they thinking? They totally ignored your river, by the way, which is, it's a beautiful river. But I didn't know that you had a river here till I went to Josh's house. This was your plan. And so I wanted to try and leave you with something as food for thought. What can you do to begin the dialogue to change this place? This is a project in North Carolina where here's your arterial. In this particular case, this happens to be actually a better arterial than you have because it's a boulevard. This is an interstate. These are service roads on the side. Now keep in mind the golden section that I talked about a minute ago. So the first thing you want to do is introduce pedestrian activity. Pedestrians cannot exist in this, right? So what you do is you begin building public sidewalks. Now mention, Today, this is not the right section, but this is a pedestrian light pole. It's not an interstate light pole. It would be 30 feet with a cobra head and have no human relationship whatsoever. So this is kind of your first intervention. And then you code the corridor to the scale of the corridor so that you can get the golden section. And you start building, well, let me back up a second. When you do this, you unload these big parking lots on the street. So you put some parking there, and there's your parking on the street. You can begin, this is starting to feel a little bit better. You haven't done a whole lot. So then you code the architecture so that the scale, now this isn't Castroville, but the scale of buildings that front the corridor are relative to the right-of-way width. You have a 150-foot right-of-way out there. So those buildings can be fairly tall. I'm not a big fan. This is a 3-story building. This whole corridor could have been 3 stories. In this particular case, we were testing the model. But look at the buildings that are beginning to be placed in the parking lot that you just saw. Back up. This is where we started. Starting to get some retail on the front. It's still a little bit walkable. Not many people are going to cross this corridor just yet. And then we introduce street trees. We're beginning to introduce the golden section, and we're softening the edges. So now this is closer to the golden section. It's maybe kind of a square. We have on-street parking. The buildings are beginning to fill in over time. And then we introduce another layer of street trees because we want the golden section. Understand that. So this is not the golden section. This is. So all we did was planted that bufferway. And when you do this, people start coming. It's what they want. It's what you're building to attract the best and the brightest. And if we do it really well, we could get light rail. And light rail will be what takes us to and from San Antonio in a human way. So make it easier. This is a copy of a smart code, the Transect. This is what it looks like. You can buy it, and actually it's free. You can use it. Finally, I'll leave you with this. Society grows great when old men and old women plant trees under whose shade they know they will never sit. Henri Castro didn't know this, but he did it. And you're the recipient of the trees he planted. What are you going to do to preserve Castroville? It's your task now. It's all yours.